Gessesse, Executive Director of the CEE Center for Young Black Professionals. Thanks so much for joining us. So let's start there. I mean, we are well into this campaign now. We're heading into the home stretch. Have you heard anything in terms of making good on all the commitments and the promises of the past 18 months?
I'm not hearing much. I'm not hearing the candidates talk a lot about Black communities specifically, or racialized communities. We're hearing a lot about Indigenous folks, which is rightfully so and needs to be on the docket. But I'm not hearing much about the Black community based off of what's been going on.
When I think about the earlier days of the pandemic and, of course, the social justice movements and all the commitments we were getting from corporations and governments, we would have guests like you on the program. We'd say, are you afraid that as the issue gets, the news of the day gets further behind us, then they start to stray? Is there a bit of that happening right now where the politicians don't feel like they have to put their focus here as much as they promised to have a long-term focus on these issues?
I think that it says a lot, right? I think they're speaking to the constituents that they believe are going to go out and vote. And I think that our community's needs and voices not being portrayed in most of the questions that are being answered, or even on any of their platforms, speaks to the fact that, you know, our community's plight is something that has been going on for a long time. It's been consistent. We're overrepresented in all the wrong places. And that's likely not going to change unless government really steps up and starts to make us a priority.
Apart from the discussions the leaders are having or what they've put on their platforms, in terms of just crisscrossing the country, visiting different ridings, do you even get the sense that they're paying attention to Black communities, that they're visiting Black communities during this campaign?
I don't see that happening as much as I think should be happening. I think that, especially as of lately, in terms of investments in Black communities, as well as what we have been seeing in society at large, I think that a much more targeted approach, especially as our communities are still grappling with the side effects of COVID-19, that there should be a very intentional presence for these candidates in our communities.
If the leaders aren't engaging the community, what is the danger that the community doesn't feel sort of engaged in the process and come September 20th actually wants to take part in the process?
I think that's a huge threat to our democracy. I think that when people are not seen and heard, and that's not echoed back to them, then I think that it definitely affects engagement. And in Black communities specifically, civic engagement is something that, you know, organizations like ours are constantly trying to encourage, and it becomes even harder when folks are not necessarily, present in communities. Their needs and their concerns are not being addressed as they are touring the country. I think that we have seen investments and we want to see that continue, but it's not reassuring when, that discussion isn't happening, especially when we don't know who will be leading our country.
What would you like to see if you could actually sort of inject your wish into not only the campaign, but whoever forms government coming out of this? What initiatives, what promises, because we've had a lot of promises so far on a number of fronts, what promises and what actual implementation of promises would make a difference?
I think first and foremost, investments have been made in Black communities more than I've seen in my entire career, and I would like that to continue no matter who comes into power. The second thing I would like to see is parties across, nonpartisan, all parties coming together and thinking about what a recovery is going to look like for all Canadians. Indigenous and Black communities and racialized communities being at the forefront. We're overrepresented everywhere in the wrong places, and our recovery is very vital to generations to come. And I think the third thing that I would like to definitely see is the investments and the promises that have been made, regardless of who ends up in power. Our communities need to see investments, and not just financial investments in relationships. I think that we need to be able to build relationships so that no matter who comes into power at any given time, the needs of our community are clear, there are clear leaders that they can lean on, and that will transcend from generation and from party to party. Relationship is really at the key of this.
Right, so that's the political front of it. I think, too, in terms of all the promises and the overtures we got from Canada's business community and some of our biggest corporations and institutions, did they start to make good on some of those promises of the early days of the pandemic?
I think that we're seeing a shift. I think we're seeing a shift in corporate Canada. And I think that government, corporations, and nonprofit sector all have a role to play in recovery for Canada and including all Canadians. And I think that whoever ends up in power, after September 20th, needs to keep in mind and hold businesses accountable as well as themselves to make good on the promises that Black communities have been waiting far too long to see come to fruition. I think now the time for chatter is over, and I think the time for action is now.
Yeah, because we've heard a lot about the fact that we want the recovery to be inclusive. We want to make sure that a rising tide will lift all boats. Clearly, there's still work to be done on that front.
There's a lot of work to be done. I mean, the Black communities' challenges are not things that happen overnight. They didn't show up during COVID either. They were there far before then. And so it's going to take time and effort in order for us to be able to overcome some of these challenges. And I think that there needs to be a conceded effort, and that, our community's plight and the challenges that we're facing are not a trend. It's not what's cool. And it's not where we're gonna, all rush towards this thing that is a hot issue right now. It was here before, it remains, and it's all Canadians' jobs to ensure that it doesn't continue.